When Ethan first saw the yacht, it looked like a sleeping ghost, stranded, peeling, and forgotten. The marina's waters were still that morning, reflecting the outline of the massive, once luxurious vessel that time had clearly abandoned. Her name, barely legible under layers of grime and salt, read, The Elysian. The broker who sold it to him said it had been seized years ago after the owner went bankrupt. No one had touched it since. For Ethan, it was a bargain and a dream rolled into one. A chance to restore something beautiful that the world had thrown away. He wasn't rich, but he was patient. The kind of man who liked projects that took shape slowly. He imagined repainting the hull, refurbishing the deck, installing modern lighting, and turning the Elysian into a floating home. Something about the idea of breathing life back into forgotten places spoke to him. He'd spent months searching for the right project, and when he found the yacht, moored at the farthest slip of a quiet coastal town, he felt like fate had whispered to him. The first time he stepped aboard, the wood creaked beneath his feet like old bones. Everything smelled of seaweed and mildew. Sunlight filtered through broken skylights, casting pale streaks across the dust-covered furniture. The galley was a mess of rusted utensils, the captain's cabin lined with warped books and framed photos left to decay. It was eerie but enchanting, a time capsule of a vanished life. He spent that first day cataloging what needed to be fixed. The plumbing, the wiring, the mold, the broken engine. It would be months of work, but he didn't care. That evening, as the sun dipped low and the marina turned gold, he locked up and drove back home, planning to return the following weekend to start the renovation. When he came back 2 weeks later, he expected to find things as he left them. Instead, something felt off the moment he parked. The air seemed heavier, the dock strangely alive. Seagulls scattered noisily overhead, and there were footprints leading down the walkway. Several pairs, adult and child-sized. The lock on the cabin door was gone, replaced by a cheap silver latch that definitely wasn't his. Ethan's stomach twisted. He pushed open the cabin door and froze. The once empty interior was now lived in. The dust was gone. Blankets were strewn across the floor. A pot simmered on a portable stove that hadn't been there before. Toys, actual children's toys, were piled near the galley table. Clothes hung from the railing like laundry in a backyard. The space smelled of detergent and cheap air freshener. Someone had moved in. He wandered deeper, disbelief turning to anger. Every room bore signs of life. Toothbrushes in the sink, grocery bags under the counter, a family photo taped to the wall. A man, a woman, 2 kids. The woman's face stood out immediately. She looked familiar in that way you recognize someone you've argued with once in line somewhere. The haircut, the posture. Something about her screamed Karen. Ethan's mind raced. Who were these people? How had they even gotten access? The yacht was legally his. He had the deed, the marina contract, the proof of purchase. And yet here they were, comfortably settled in like they owned the place. He left quietly that day, fuming, but determined to handle it properly. The next morning, he called the local authorities. The marina manager seemed surprised, promised to look into it, and then went silent for days. When he pressed again, the response came curt. They've been around here for a while. Maybe work it out with them. Work it out? With strangers living on his yacht? Ethan drove back again, this time unannounced, hoping to catch whoever was squatting there. From the moment he stepped onto the dock, he could feel eyes on him. Curtains inside the yacht twitched. A child's laughter echoed faintly, and then as he climbed aboard, a door slammed inside. The eerie silence that followed made his pulse race. He stood there, listening to the creaks and distant hum of waves, until a faint voice came from within. Muffled but sharp, scolding. He couldn't make out the words, but he didn't need to. He knew exactly what kind of person he was dealing with. That night, he sat in his truck just outside the marina, watching his own yacht illuminated by the dock lights. A shadow moved inside, tall, broad-shouldered, pacing. Then another. The woman, pointing and gesturing, clearly angry about something. The children appeared for a moment near the deck, peering curiously into the darkness. Ethan clenched his jaw. This wasn't just trespassing. It was invasion. Still, something about the way they'd made themselves at home unsettled him. It wasn't just opportunism. It looked deliberate, as if they believed, truly believed, that the Elysian belonged to them. The marina stayed quiet through the night, except for the distant rumble of waves and the occasional clang of metal from his yacht. When dawn broke, Ethan finally left, but not before snapping photos of the intruders' presence, every sign of them. He thought that would be enough to get them removed. But the next time he came back, things had escalated. His for sale sign was gone. A new one, written in marker and taped to the railing, declared, "Private property. Trespassers will be reported." The irony hit hard. Ethan realized then that this wasn't going to be simple. The family on his yacht had claimed it, and somehow the system wasn't in a rush to help him reclaim it. What he didn't know, what he couldn't yet imagine, was how far this Karen and her family were willing to go to keep it that way. And as the sun set behind the rows of boats, painting the marina in crimson light, Ethan made himself a quiet promise. He wasn't giving up the Elysian without a fight. Ethan returned home that evening with a storm brewing inside him. The image of that handwritten sign, "Private property," burned into his mind like an insult carved into wood. He couldn't stop replaying it. His yacht, his investment, now occupied by strangers who had the audacity to claim it as their own. The marina's silence, the authorities' indifference, the smug boldness of whoever had taken over. It all tangled into one maddening thought. They think I won't fight back. He spent the night gathering every document he could find. The bill of sale, the deed transfer, the broker's emails, the marina contract. Everything was in order. He had done everything legally, paid every fee, signed every form. The yacht was his property beyond dispute. But still, the next morning, when he drove to the town's small harbor office to demand action, the response was lukewarm at best. The harbor master, a grizzled man with the air of someone who had seen too many disputes, skimmed through the papers and sighed. He admitted that yes, the yacht belonged to Ethan. But then came the dreaded words. "This might take a while." Apparently, the family had been there for months. They'd filed something that made the situation complicated. A caretaker claim. It was a term Ethan had never heard before. He learned, to his disbelief, that in certain coastal towns, abandoned vessels left unattended for long enough could be temporarily maintained by civilians who reported them as derelict. The intention was to prevent pollution or hazards, but the system was old, loosely enforced, and open to abuse. And that was exactly what this family had done. They'd filed a notice months earlier stating they were maintaining the yacht after discovering it unsafe and unclaimed. The irony was nauseating. They had broken into it and then filed a claim pretending they were the ones protecting it. Worse yet, the marina staff, trying to avoid responsibility, had apparently let them stay under the pretense of temporary occupancy while ownership was being clarified. It wasn't just arrogance. It was calculated manipulation. Ethan could feel the walls closing in. The harbor master warned him that removing the family by force could get him charged with trespassing or harassment until the dispute was resolved. In other words, he was legally barred from entering his own yacht. That day, as he stood at the edge of the pier staring at the Elysian, he saw movement again behind its windows. Curtains fluttered. A silhouette lingered. The woman. The same one from the photo. She was moving with purpose now, carrying something heavy, rearranging furniture, acting as though she owned the place. Then a man appeared beside her, tall and broad, shirtless under the morning sun, hammering something against the railing, reinforcing their private sign. They were nesting, settling in. Ethan's stomach churned with disbelief. Every time he thought the situation couldn't get worse, it did. He began digging deeper, contacting the broker who sold him the yacht. The man confirmed that the paperwork was legitimate, and that the previous owner's bankruptcy had cleared all liens. Legally, it was clean, but the bureaucratic delay was what the squatters were counting on. Each week that passed made their case stronger, their presence more normalized. The marina's other boat owners whispered among themselves, watching the situation unfold. Some sympathized with Ethan, others stayed quiet. No one wanted trouble. That was how people like the woman, Karen, as Ethan started calling her in his thoughts, got away with things. They thrived on apathy. Weeks passed, and Ethan began documenting everything. Every visit, every new addition to the yacht's exterior, every change. He noticed how the family expanded their territory. They'd started storing bicycles on the dock, hanging wet clothes on the railings, even setting up a plastic patio set on the deck. One afternoon he arrived to find fairy lights strung across the bow, powered by a generator he hadn't left there. They were transforming his yacht into their home, in full view of everyone. He tried once more to escalate it legally, but even his lawyer warned him that eviction through maritime law was slow and riddled with loopholes. The courts prioritized commercial disputes, not private vessels. If he wanted them out, he'd have to prove they were actively damaging the property or committing fraud. But to do that, he needed evidence beyond what the marina already knew. So he decided to gather it himself. One night, well after sunset, he returned to the marina with a flashlight and camera. The docks were quiet, the water dark and glassy under the moonlight. The Elysian loomed in front of him, her once polished hull now scratched from their neglect. He moved closer, snapping silent photos from the shadows. The curtains glowed faintly from inside. Warm light, the hum of a TV, laughter. It made his blood boil. He crept closer, recording the generator cables they'd installed illegally, the trash bags piled beside the stern, the markings on the hull where they'd painted over her name. That last detail hit him hard. They'd renamed the yacht. The letters were crude, hand-painted, reading, "The Serenity." It was like watching someone erase his dream in real time. When he sent the photos to his lawyer, the man agreed it was evidence of property defacement, but warned that it still wouldn't result in immediate removal. "They'll get a notice," he said, "but that can take weeks, maybe months." Ethan was furious, but he stayed methodical. If he couldn't force them out, he would outsmart them. He learned everything he could about the legal gray area they were exploiting. The caretaker claim, the maritime squatter's loophole, the lack of oversight in small harbors. It was a system built for honest people but easily twisted by the dishonest. Meanwhile, the family grew bolder. Karen began leaving notes taped to the railing whenever Ethan visited. Handwritten messages dripping with passive aggression. "Stop trespassing. We've already reported you. This is our home now." It was surreal, like living in a reverse reality where wrong was right and right was ignored. One afternoon, he watched from his car as the woman, Karen, chatted with another boater nearby, laughing, gesturing toward the Elysian proudly as if telling her life story. It made his stomach turn. She was crafting a narrative, that they'd rescued an abandoned vessel, that they'd given it new life. She wasn't just squatting, she was rewriting history, and in that moment, Ethan realized something chilling. This wasn't the first time she'd done this. The confidence, the paperwork, the way she manipulated the system, it was too rehearsed. She knew exactly how far she could push before crossing the line. That night, Ethan began tracing her name through public records. It took hours, but he eventually found a string of similar incidents: old eviction filings, property disputes, small claims cases involving temporary caretaking. Each one had her name or her husband's attached. It wasn't a coincidence. It was a pattern. They were professional squatters, drifting from place to place, exploiting neglected properties until forced out, then moving on to the next. The yacht was just their latest conquest, but this time Ethan promised himself it would be their last. As he stared at the glowing outline of the Elysian that night, rage gave way to resolve. He wasn't just dealing with squatters. He was dealing with con artists, and if the system wouldn't protect his property, he'd find a way to turn their own game against them. The third month after Ethan had bought the Elysian arrived like a test of patience. What began as disbelief had curdled into something far heavier, a quiet, simmering fury that lived with him every day. His emails to the marina went unanswered. His lawyer kept telling him to let the process work. But the process was a slow-moving beast, and while it crawled, the squatters thrived. The yacht, his yacht, no longer even looked like itself. Each time Ethan drove down to the docks, he found another insult painted across its bones. The once white hull was now dulled to a patchy beige, where Karen's husband had redecorated with leftover paint. The sleek chrome rails had been wrapped with plastic vines. A string of plastic flamingos stood along the deck, and the name The Serenity gleamed proudly where the Elysian once had. They had defaced it completely. The family's presence had grown so embedded that other boat owners now avoided that side of the marina altogether. What had once been quiet waterside serenity was now a circus. Noise, music, laughter, trash. Karen's children played tag on the dock, leaving muddy footprints everywhere. Her husband, who seemed to think of himself as the captain now, drank beer in a lawn chair on the deck from noon till sunset. And Karen, she ruled the scene like a queen. She had perfected the art of smiling for the right people. When the harbor patrol came around, she was always polite, always talking about how grateful she was for being allowed to care for the yacht until ownership was sorted out. The audacity of it made Ethan's skin crawl. He decided that day that he wasn't waiting anymore. When he arrived at the marina that morning, there was no plan, no lawyer, no paperwork, only a grim determination that he would make them look him in the eye. He walked down the dock, his footsteps heavy against the wood, heart pounding with every creak of the planks. He could already see her, Karen, standing on the deck, sunglasses perched on her head, watering a row of plastic plants lined along the railing as if she had lived there her whole life. The air was thick with tension. The gulls cried overhead. The water slapped quietly against the dock. Karen froze mid-motion when she noticed him. Her expression changed, from surprise to annoyance, then to a cold, practiced smirk. She gestured toward something behind her, and the husband appeared from below deck, towering and unsmiling. Ethan felt his jaw tighten. Every rational part of him screamed to stay calm, to avoid escalation, but all he could see was everything they had stolen. His time, his money, his peace of mind. He pointed toward the yacht, to the name painted over his own, to the piles of junk they had accumulated, to the lock on the cabin door that he himself had once installed. For a moment, no one moved. Then Karen stepped forward. Her hands rested on her hips, her face unreadable. She said something. He couldn't hear it from the dock, but her lips moved fast, sharp, confident. The kind of tone that didn't invite discussion. The kind of tone that told people she was used to getting her way. Her husband laughed, a low, mocking laugh that drifted over the sound of the waves. He crossed his arms and leaned against the railing as if daring Ethan to do something about it. That moment broke something in him. He stepped closer, his voice raised now, no longer restrained. The frustration that had been building for months poured out. Every unanswered email, every official who refused to act, every hour he had spent dreaming about this boat before they poisoned it with their presence. He demanded they leave. Now, Karen didn't back down. Instead, she pointed to a piece of paper taped to the cabin door. The same caretaker claim he'd seen before, now laminated and freshly posted, like a flag of conquest. She tapped it with manic pride, mouthing something he couldn't quite hear. But the meaning was clear enough. They weren't leaving. The husband moved closer now, muttering something to her, his eyes never leaving Ethan. His expression was calm in a way that made it worse, like someone who had already won. Ethan took out his phone, filming everything, recording every insult, every gesture. It wasn't anger now. It was strategy. If they wanted a fight, he'd give them one that left a trail of evidence behind. He knew the camera would catch the man's threatening posture, the smug grin on Karen's face, the entire delusion of their ownership. Eventually, he turned and walked away, shaking with adrenaline. The confrontation hadn't driven them out, but it had revealed everything he needed to know. They weren't scared. They weren't even pretending anymore. They were comfortable because they'd done this before, and they believed they could do it again. That night, he uploaded the footage to a private folder, sent copies to his lawyer, and began reaching out to the local news. He didn't expect much. Small-town media rarely cared, But what he didn't anticipate was how quickly word would spread. By the end of the week, a few marina regulars had seen the footage. The whispers began. The perfect image Karen had built started to crack. Rumors circulated about how she'd taken the yacht, how the family wasn't supposed to be there at all. Some boat owners even started filming their own encounters with her. Karen noticed, of course. The next time Ethan visited, she was waiting at the dock, arms crossed, her smile gone. The fake friendliness had been replaced with visible irritation. She didn't even bother pretending anymore. She told anyone who passed that Ethan was harassing her, that he was obsessed, that she was the real victim here. It was classic deflection. And it worked on some, but not all. One of the other owners, an elderly man who had been at the marina for decades, quietly approached Ethan and told him something that chilled him to the core. The family had done this before, not just with boats, but with houses, RVs, even a beach cabin once. Each time they exploited small-town systems, claimed caretaker rights, and drained properties until the legal owners gave up or sold out of exhaustion. They'd been chased out of 3 different marinas already. They were nomads of manipulation. Ethan realized then that he wasn't just in a property dispute. He was part of a pattern, and if he didn't find a way to end it, they would move on to the next victim and do it again. He began to gather allies, other boat owners, the broker who sold him the yacht, even a few locals who were tired of Karen's behavior. He compiled every photo, every message, every recording into a dossier thick enough to choke the system that had ignored him for months. For the first time, he wasn't just reacting, he was planning. But the more pressure he applied, the more desperate Karen's family became. The husband started watching him whenever he came by, standing on the deck like a guard. The children, once playful, now went silent when they saw him. Karen, meanwhile, doubled down on her lies, telling anyone who would listen that Ethan had abandoned the yacht and was trying to take it back unfairly. It was a war now. Quiet, psychological, but escalating with every visit. The marina's calm had turned toxic. Neighbors whispered. Lines were drawn, and beneath the gentle slap of the waves, tension brewed like a storm waiting to break. And then one evening, it did. When Ethan returned one night to check on the yacht, he found something that stopped him cold. His tires had been slashed, all 4 of them neatly, deliberately. A silent message left under the flickering docklight. The battle for the Elysian had officially crossed a line. The night Ethan found his tires slashed was the moment everything shifted. Until then, the conflict had been frustrating, exhausting, but still restrained by a thin veneer of legality. After that night, that line was gone. There was no mistaking it anymore. This wasn't just a property dispute. It was a personal war. He stood there in the dim light of the marina, the smell of rubber and salt air mixing in the cold breeze. The silence was heavier than usual, broken only by the sound of distant water lapping against hulls. Somewhere down the dock, a light flickered inside the Elysian. He could see Karen's silhouette through the frosted cabin window, moving about as if nothing was wrong. The image burned into him, that calm domestic motion inside his yacht, while outside sat his vandalized car. By the time morning came, his anger had hardened into resolve. The authorities were called. Reports were filed, but the officers treated it like a petty act of vandalism, not part of a larger theft of property. They told him they couldn't prove who did it. That was the problem. People like Karen and her husband knew exactly how far to go without leaving evidence. They'd perfected the art of crossing every moral line while staying just short of a legal one. Ethan realized then that traditional routes wouldn't save him. If the system refused to act, he'd have to bring the pressure himself. And the only weapon that seemed to have any real power anymore was exposure. That week, he uploaded a video. It wasn't dramatic, just a calm retelling of what had happened so far. Footage of the yacht, the paperwork proving ownership, photos of the new paint job, and finally, the note he'd found taped to the cabin declaring it private property. He didn't name names, but he didn't have to. He titled it simply, "I bought an abandoned yacht, then found strangers living inside." Within days, the video went viral. What had started as a desperate attempt for help exploded into a digital wildfire. Commenters flooded in, some offering advice, others demanding justice, and plenty expressing disbelief at how people could just move into someone else's property without consequence. The story struck a nerve. It wasn't just about a yacht anymore. It was about every person who'd ever been taken advantage of by someone who knew how to twist the rules. The next time Ethan visited the marina, everything felt different. The quiet had been replaced by whispers. People pointed when they saw him. Some came up just to thank him for speaking out, while others avoided eye contact, afraid of being dragged into the growing storm. Karen noticed too. Her usual smug composure had cracks now. He could see it in the way she moved. Faster, sharper, her posture defensive. Her husband had grown more aggressive as well, standing watch like a sentry every time Ethan approached. The children, once carefree, now watched him warily from behind curtains. It was working. For the first time since this nightmare began, Ethan felt the balance of power shift ever so slightly. But the exposure came with consequences. The family knew they were being talked about, and they didn't take it quietly. Soon, fake accounts started appearing online, commenting under Ethan's videos, claiming he was the squatter, that he had abandoned the yacht, that the caretaker family had saved it. Photos of the yacht's interior, freshly cleaned and decorated by Karen, appeared online under new usernames, all captioned with carefully crafted narratives. They painted themselves as victims of a vindictive owner, trying to throw them out after they had rescued his neglected property. It was propaganda, spun with the precision of someone who'd done it before. The comments section turned into a battlefield. Strangers arguing over who was right, who was lying, and who the real victim was. The chaos was exhausting, but in that noise, truth had a way of surviving. The more the family tried to twist the story, the more people began to dig. Internet sleuths traced old court filings, matching names, dates, and locations. Soon, Karen's history started surfacing. Eviction cases, property disputes, even a pattern of moving into foreclosed homes and claiming caretaker rights. The facade shattered. Now, the pressure was on. The marina's management, previously content to ignore the situation, suddenly found themselves in the public eye. News outlets started calling, curious about the yacht squatter's story that had blown up online. The next time Ethan arrived, there were cameras. Local reporters, YouTubers, even curious onlookers. The docks were busier than they'd ever been. And there, standing amid the chaos, was Karen. Her expression somewhere between fury and panic. Her husband tried to keep the cameras away, but the reporters weren't interested in his protests. They wanted footage of the Elysian, the so-called stolen yacht. That day, the illusion finally cracked. Karen tried to keep up appearances, smiling stiffly, talking to whoever would listen, spinning new lies. But now every word she said was caught on record. Every contradiction was documented. The marina, under mounting pressure, finally stepped in. They issued a formal notice, not just to Ethan, but to the family, ordering them to vacate pending a legal review. It should have been the end. But people like Karen didn't surrender quietly. A week later, Ethan arrived to find the yacht in disarray. The lights were smashed. The generator cables were gone. A thick black smear of spray paint stretched across the hull, spelling a single word: thief. Inside, it was worse. The galley had been ransacked, cabinets torn from their hinges, the mattress slashed open. His restoration tools, gone. Every corner of the yacht reeked of destruction. A last act of bitterness from people who couldn't stand losing control. They were gone, but they hadn't left empty-handed. They'd taken appliances, fixtures, and anything of value they could carry. The yacht that once held such promise now felt violated. Standing in the center of that wreckage, Ethan didn't feel anger anymore, only exhaustion. The fight had been long, public, humiliating, and costly. But as he ran his hand along the damaged railing, something inside him shifted again. This wasn't just a loss. It was a beginning. He spent the next few weeks repairing what he could. With the help of volunteers, people who had followed his story online, he scrubbed, repainted, and restored. Every act of rebuilding felt like taking a piece of his life back from the chaos Karen had brought into it. The legal system, slow as ever, eventually caught up. The family was found guilty of property damage and fraud. The caretaker claim they had filed was exposed as falsified. For the first time, Ethan saw them not as unstoppable manipulators, but as desperate con artists who had finally run out of places to hide. Months later, the Elysian looked alive again. Fresh paint, new lighting, repaired fixtures. The name, his name, restored across the hull in shining silver letters. The marina, once a place of tension, now greeted him with quiet nods and respect. But he never forgot what the ordeal had revealed. How easily someone could take what wasn't theirs, and how hard it was to take it back. As he stood on the deck one last evening, watching the sunset ripple across calm waters, he felt the faintest sense of peace return. The yacht was his again. The nightmare was over, or so he thought, because just as he was locking up for the night, a faint sound echoed from below deck, a creak of footsteps, soft and deliberate, coming from the storage cabin, and when he opened the hatch, what he found waiting in the dark wasn't what he expected. The night air was thick with salt and silence when Ethan heard it. That unmistakable creak beneath the deck. It was the sound of movement, slow and deliberate, the kind that doesn't belong in an empty boat. For a moment he stood frozen near the hatch, the faint hum of the marina lights behind him, the rhythmic slap of waves against the hull below. He had thought it was finally over. The squatters were gone, the legal battle won, the yacht his again. But as that sound came again, closer this time, a cold wave of dread ran down his spine. When he pulled the hatch open, a gust of stale air met him. The lower cabin was dark, his flashlight beam cutting through the dust like a blade. He expected to find an animal, maybe a loose tarp shifting with the wind. Instead, the light landed on something else entirely. A sleeping bag, tucked in the far corner of the storage room, half hidden behind a stack of wooden crates, was a thin sleeping bag, an empty can of beans beside it, and a small pile of clothes. Someone had been living there, recently. The realization hit him like a physical blow. The family might have left, but not all of them had gone. The following morning, Ethan returned with a security guard from the marina. They searched the yacht top to bottom, checking every storage compartment and crawl space. No one was there, but the signs of habitation were undeniable. Crumbs, footprints, a cup of water left on the counter that hadn't been there the day before. Whoever it was, they were coming and going when he wasn't around. The security cameras he installed later that week confirmed it. On the third night, motion alerts pinged his phone just after midnight. He opened the live feed and saw a figure climbing aboard the Elysian. The image was grainy, but the outline was unmistakable. It wasn't the husband. It wasn't a stranger. It was Karen. She moved with quiet purpose, her hair tied back, a large duffel slung over her shoulder. She slipped into the cabin, staying low, glancing around before vanishing below deck. Ethan watched the footage in disbelief. She was back. Alone. By morning, she was gone again, leaving behind the same sleeping bag and traces of movement. It was as though she was trying to reclaim something, sneaking in when no one was watching, haunting the yacht like a ghost who refused to leave the home she'd stolen. Ethan reported it immediately. The police came again, reviewed the footage, and filed another report. But they warned him there was little they could do unless she was caught in the act. She wasn't technically living there, not permanently. The system, once again, found a way to protect her, even now. The next few weeks became a blur of unease. Ethan barely slept. Every night he checked the cameras. Every morning he found something moved. A chair out of place, a cupboard left open, tools missing from where he'd left them. It wasn't vandalism this time. It was something else. Psychological. A silent message that she was still there, still watching, still waiting for her chance. Word spread again around the marina. Some dismissed it as paranoia. Others believed it. They had seen her car parked nearby late at night, sitting dark with no lights. A few said they'd heard footsteps on the docks after hours. Then one morning, the sleeping bag was gone. Ethan took it as a sign that maybe, finally, she'd moved on. He replaced the locks again, added more cameras, tried to convince himself the nightmare was truly over. For a few days it even felt that way. The water was calm, the work resumed, and the Elysian began to feel like his again. Until he noticed something strange in the storage cabin. A photo. It was taped to the wall, freshly printed, showing Karen's family standing proudly on the yacht months earlier, during their squatting days. In the picture, Karen was smiling, holding her youngest child on her hip, the husband waving in the background. Across the bottom, scrawled in marker, were 4 words that chilled him to the bone. It was ours first. The handwriting was unmistakable. He tore it down and threw it away. But the message stayed in his mind, replaying again and again. There was no logic to it. The yacht had never belonged to them. They had no claim, no history with it. And yet Karen had convinced herself otherwise. She had rewritten the story in her mind, made herself the rightful owner, the victim. The delusion ran deeper than he'd imagined. The following night, Ethan stayed on the yacht, not out of courage, but because he couldn't stand the thought of her slipping aboard again. He left the lights off, kept the cameras rolling, and waited in the dark, listening to every sound. The creak of the hull, the gentle tap of ropes against the dock, the faint hum of electricity in the distance. Hours passed. Then, just after 2 a.m., the sound came again, soft footsteps on the deck above him. He froze, barely breathing. The faintest shuffle followed, the creak of wood, the sound of something metallic scraping lightly against the door frame. He reached for the small flashlight beside him but didn't turn it on. Instead, he waited. The footsteps moved slowly down the stairs, one step at a time, until a shadow appeared at the end of the corridor. For a split second, he caught a glimpse. A familiar figure, thin and tense, her hair disheveled, eyes wild in the half-light. Karen. But when he moved, she bolted. By the time he reached the deck, she was gone, sprinting down the dock, vanishing into the night. The police arrived minutes later, but she had disappeared completely, her car nowhere in sight. That was the last time he saw her in person. The following week, a restraining order was granted. Her family, now under investigation for multiple similar incidents in nearby towns, had vanished without a trace. The police speculated they'd left the state, possibly living under different names. Ethan didn't care where they went, as long as they stayed gone. Still, there were nights when he woke to the sound of phantom footsteps, when he thought he saw a figure watching from the shadows near the marina gate. Each time he'd rush out, there'd be nothing there, only the soft movement of the tide beneath the boat, rocking gently as if whispering its own secret. Over time, the fear faded into vigilance. He reinforced the yacht with alarms, kept cameras running 24/7, and installed motion lights along the dock. But the feeling never fully left him. The sense that something of her still lingered in the air, in the walls, in the creaking wood that had once been her false kingdom. And then, one morning months later, as he was preparing to take the Elysian out for her first proper sail since the ordeal, Ethan found one final trace of Karen. Hidden inside a storage drawer near the helm, wrapped in a plastic bag, was a small silver locket. Inside was a photo. Karen, her husband, and their 2 children. It wasn't new. It looked old, worn, cherished, a relic of a life before all the chaos. He didn't know why she'd left it there. As a message, a mistake, or a reminder that she had once tried to claim this place as hers. But holding it in his hand, Ethan finally understood something he hadn't before. For all her cruelty, Karen's obsession wasn't just greed. It was possession, the desperate need to belong somewhere, even if she had to steal it. He threw the locket into the sea and watched it sink beneath the rippling water. The Elysian was his again, whole and restored, but she would always carry the echoes of what had happened. The trespass, the lies, the haunting. The battle had ended, but the ghost of Karen lingered in every whisper of the tide, a reminder of how fragile ownership truly was. When the morning sun rose over the marina, it painted the surface of the water gold. The waves shimmered gently, reflecting the light across the hull of the Elysian. For the first time in months, the yacht stood quiet, still, and untouched. There were no footsteps on the deck, no misplaced tools, No signs of intrusion. Only the sound of gulls in the distance and the hum of the wind through the rigging. Ethan stood at the dock, staring at the vessel that had cost him so much. His peace, his savings, nearly his sanity. But she was his. Fully, finally, completely his. The restoration was finished. The decks gleamed, the cabin smelled of polish and fresh varnish, and the engines purred like new. The nightmare with Karen and her family was over. It was time to take the Elysian on her first real voyage, the one he'd dreamed of since the day he found her abandoned, rusted and forgotten. Yet beneath the satisfaction, there was a flicker of unease. He'd spent weeks checking and rechecking every inch of the boat, ensuring there were no surprises left behind. But something about the silence felt heavy. Not peaceful, but hollow. As though the yacht remembered everything that had happened. As though she carried ghosts in her hull. Still, Ethan refused to let paranoia ruin this day. He cast off from the dock, the ropes slipping free, the yacht gliding out into open water. The engines thrummed beneath his feet. The sea breeze filled his lungs, and for the first time in months, he felt a genuine sense of freedom. He spent the morning sailing along the coast, testing systems, adjusting sails, and letting the rhythmic motion of the waves wash away the last traces of fear. The world stretched endlessly around him. Blue sky, blue sea, and the faint outline of land in the distance. For a while it felt like peace had returned. But as he explored the yacht's interior later that afternoon, something caught his attention. A faint, rhythmic tapping coming from below deck. It wasn't the sound of waves or pipes. It was sharper, irregular, almost purposeful. He followed it to the engine room expecting to find a loose panel or tool. But the sound stopped as soon as he entered. The room was immaculate, every bolt, every wire perfectly in place. Yet when he turned to leave, he noticed something strange near the far corner. A small hatch in the wall, sealed shut with rusted screws. He had never seen it before, not during the renovation, not during inspections. It wasn't on any of the blueprints either. Curiosity overtook caution. He fetched a screwdriver and began to remove the screws one by one. The metal groaned softly, releasing a faint smell of damp wood and oil. When the hatch finally gave way, it revealed a narrow compartment, barely large enough for a person to crawl inside. Inside was darkness. And then, as his flashlight beam swept across the space, he saw it. A small collection of belongings, a plastic toy, a torn blanket, and an old notebook with a cracked cover. The air was stale, thick with the scent of mildew and something else, something faintly metallic. It was clear this space had been used, hidden, and forgotten for some time. Ethan reached for the notebook. The cover was soft with age, the pages curled and stained by moisture. He flipped it open, expecting to find notes or maintenance logs. Instead, he found words written in a shaky, frantic hand. The first page was filled with lists, grocery items, names, numbers. But as he turned the pages, the writing became erratic, the lines uneven, the ink smeared as though written in haste. It was a journal, and from the handwriting, it was Karen's. The entries began shortly after she and her family had moved on to the yacht. At first, they read like casual notes, complaints about the cold, the smell of the water, the noise from the docks. But as the pages continued, the tone shifted. The words grew darker. She wrote about voices in the hull, about hearing footsteps when she was alone, about the yacht rejecting them. She claimed that the yacht belonged to someone else. Not Ethan, not her, but someone who never left. By the final pages, her handwriting was barely legible. The entries turned into desperate scrawls about things moving at night, about her husband wanting to leave, about her refusing to go. The last line was written in shaky, uneven letters that trailed off mid-sentence. "It's watching us from below." Ethan froze. He flipped through the rest of the notebook, but that was where it ended. No date, no signature, nothing after that entry. For several minutes he just stood there, the sound of the waves filling the silence. It had to be nonsense, the paranoid ramblings of a woman unraveling under pressure. Still, the discovery left a chill in the air. He carefully closed the hatch, locked it, and tried to shake the feeling that he wasn't alone. That night, Anchored a few miles offshore, he sat on the deck, watching the stars reflect across the water. The wind was soft, the sea calm, but below him, somewhere deep within the yacht's structure, came that faint tapping again. He tried to ignore it. Hours passed. The tapping stopped. Then, just as he began to drift to sleep in his cabin, there came another sound. A faint thud, like something shifting beneath the floorboards. Then another, and another. He sat up, heart racing, the memory of Karen's last words burning in his mind. He turned on every light, checked every room, every hatch, every compartment. Nothing. The yacht was empty, perfectly empty. When morning came, the sea was still and gray. He decided to head back to the marina. The thrill of adventure was gone, replaced by a dull unease that refused to fade. As the shore grew closer, he caught his reflection in the cabin window, pale, tired, wary, and behind it, just for an instant, something else, a faint shape. It looked like a woman standing in the reflection of the corridor behind him. When he turned, there was nothing there, only the quiet hum of the engine and the creak of the yacht's frame. He told himself it was exhaustion, nerves playing tricks on him after months of stress. But as the Elysian pulled into the dock, he made one final decision. He sold the yacht. It wasn't easy. It took months to find a buyer, and he offered it at a loss. But when the papers were signed, he felt something lift off his shoulders, as though the weight of the entire ordeal had finally released him. The new owner, a retired couple planning to sail around the Mediterranean, sent him a photo weeks later. The yacht looked beautiful, gleaming under the sun, free and alive again. For the first time, Ethan felt peace. Until one evening, months after the sale, he received an email. It was from the new owner. Attached was a photo of the engine room, specifically the same hatch he had found hidden in the wall. The message was short. "Did you ever notice this before? We heard tapping last night." Ethan never replied. He deleted the email, shut his laptop, and stared out at the sea beyond his window. The water was dark that night, rippling faintly under the moonlight, whispering in a language only the Elysian would understand. He didn't know whether what Karen had written was madness, or whether there was something older, deeper, and more unknowable living within the yacht's frame. All he knew was that the yacht never truly belonged to anyone. Not to him, not to Karen, not to whoever sailed her next. She was alive in her own way, and she always wanted someone aboard. As the tide rolled in, Ethan whispered a quiet farewell to the sea, to the Elysian, to Karen, and to the strange chain of fate that had bound them all together. Somewhere out there, the yacht drifted on, carrying its secrets into the horizon. And from the dark beneath her decks, something tapped. Faint, rhythmic, endless.